Welcome to State of the Franchise, a podcast that discusses franchises of all shapes, sizes, backgrounds, and types. My name is Tom Stadler. I'm one of your hosts on this journey, here with my fellow host, Fred Dakin.
Tom, it's great to be here in the stewed as always.
Indeed it is, Fred. And on an occasion no less that deserves to be celebrated than our 1-year anniversary.
Yes, we have been podcasting for a whole year, longer than I don't know about you, but this is now the longest podcast I've been a part of.
Is that right?
Yes.
And I would love to ask you about some of your podcast background as we get into this, being that this is our intro episode for the State of the Franchise. So, for those of you who are not familiar with State of the Franchise, this is a podcast about franchises in the very loose sense of the term and very more traditional sense of the term.
Yeah, we talk about all sorts of different properties, from films to TV shows, restaurants. I think one of the original titles I thought of was Property Brothers, but it was already taken, I guess.
Yeah, that was too bad.
But I think one thing that, and we'll get into why we like this podcast format so much, is anything kind of goes, and it's anything that's special to our guests and to us. Anything that we can kind of nerd out on, kind of make insights about. That's what we want to do on this podcast.
Yeah, so each week you will hear us talking about topics that do kind of fall into a sense of a grouping that we could define as a franchise, but maybe not in the most traditional sense of the term as we were talking about, because we have done things like works of a composer, or we will look at things like the library of an actor, like throughout their career, or maybe even just kind of like a restaurant like ownership group that owns multiple well-known fast food chains.
Yes, like for example, one of our episodes we did was a pizza blind taste test with Jasmine Gonzalez and Joe Francisco, where we tasted pizza from Pizza Hut, Toppers, Domino's, and Papa John's. Was that the last one?
Nailed it.
Yeah, and you'd have to listen to the episode to find out which one we liked the best. But that's just a sampling of how we can talk about all sorts of things on this podcast.
Yeah, and I think in that term, we have kind of hit our main goal when we came into this. And I do want to talk about a little bit of our journey, Fred, of how we got from the original concept to what we've been doing now to episodes like that. But I think first, let's give people a little idea of like who we are. So, who is Fred Dakin?
Fred Dakin is a improviser. I like to think that I'm a writer of some sorts. I do it as more of a hobby. I don't really share it, but I live in Wisconsin. I've lived many places, but this is the place I lay my hat now. I love being here. I love doing improv, and I kind of developed a love of podcasts probably about the time I was 20. I was working as a delivery driver, so I logged a lot of hours. I listened to a lot of the Kevin Smith podcast, because that's like when he started, just like he had 4 podcasts going at one time. He had like Jay and Silent Bob Get Old. He had Smodcast, and it was kind of like being friends with, people you liked or comedians and hang out with them. I remember like comedians like Pete Holmes, Nick Kroll, like those kind of comedy bang bang people. All were on podcasts consistently, on each other's podcasts. And I was like, I really like this vibe, because it's like hanging out, but they're talking about things that could be very interesting or very goofy. And I definitely always wanted to do a podcast. So my first podcast I did was with my friend Isaac, and it was called Hold Up, Throw Down. And the premise of that podcast was we watched movies from our childhood, and we decided if they still held up, or if they threw down, as in were they still good, or were they stinkers? And after a while, we kind of fell off from doing that. And Tom and I, we met through doing improv, and eventually became good friends. And we started doing this podcast. But that's just me, Tom. Who are you?
Tom Stadler. Well, I guess for me, I started listening to podcasts maybe about 10 years ago, because, well, maybe even less than that, maybe about 8, because it was right around when cereal was like getting really big, and that was kind of my entry point. And I was like, well, what else is out there if this is so good? And I started peeking around at a lot of the comedy podcasts. But even before that, Fred, I actually went to college to be a film major, but I did graduate in radio, TV, and film. So I had a little bit of background doing radio broadcasting and putting together radio shows, mostly just through classwork and whatnot. So I never thought that was a skill I would carry forward, but I always loved the idea of doing some kind of radio show format. So when finally over the years got into improv comedy here in Milwaukee, it started to kind of peek back into my brain that like maybe I could start doing productions now that I have performers around me again, and I could start working on things. And yeah, as luck had it, we met through improv, Fred and I, and we decided we wanted to do something, that was different than anybody else was doing. And I've never really done the research to find out if what we're doing is all that unique, but I got to think nobody's doing franchises the same way that we are right now.
No, because the thing about podcasts is I feel everyone's talking about the same, like, 100 things. It's just people bringing their own experience to it, their own personality and insight. Like, I don't know how many podcasts I've listened to about The Shining or, about Pulp Fiction, but it's more about, and maybe this just sounds like we're just bragging about us. It's just the people who are doing it that make it special.
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking about us, really. I think what makes our podcast special is we have guests who come on, and most of our guests come loaded with a topic. It's something that they are passionate about, that they are very interested in. And sometimes it's something that Tom and I are familiar with. Sometimes we will be just experience it for the first time. Like we did RuPaul's Drag Race. Neither of us has really watched much of it. Mm-hmm. We've done a few sports ones, and we did fantasy football, which I've never done fantasy football, but Tom apparently is like really good at it, I guess. Is like a gambling man. I don't know how it works.
It's my secret life, Fred. We don't talk about that too much. It's funny, though, that you do bring that up, because I do think there is a lot of education that almost comes through this podcast that I didn't expect to explore when we got started. And it's funny you brought up sports as well, because one of my first podcasts I did was with a friend of mine who guested on the Wayne's World episode, Peter Intile. We had dabbled in doing a sports-based podcast probably about 8 years ago, right after I started listening to a podcast, and we were trying to do it remote. One of the first remote attempts.
Oh, wow.
It sounded pretty bad because he was just kind of coming through the computer, like a telephone call, like on Skype. But it's funny that now we have gotten so much better at it. I don't even think if we told you which episodes were being recorded remote, you guys would believe us, because we've gotten such great equipment now that capability is what it is.
Yeah, when I go back and re-listen, I don't remember which is remote and which is not.
Mm-hmm. Which is a great benefit to us. And I think it's something that we've really evolved with this journey. And I wanted to ask you, Fred, just a little bit about your insights into what did you expect coming into this podcast as far as approaching franchises, even if it's just simply your definition, to where you think we are now?
One thing I wanted to do in a podcast, because I am I feel I have this useless well of knowledge about film, more than anything else, film, television, that just needs to be used somewhere. It's not getting used in a 9-to-5 job. It's not getting used at home with my wife. She doesn't enjoy anything like that. If I want to be this director, she doesn't care. She loves watching movies with me, and we love going to see movies.
Yeah.
But she could care less about the IMDb of it all, which I'm if I watch an animated film, I'm scrolling, I was who's doing the voice of that little dog? Who's that?
Yeah.
I'm all about it. And also I do improv comedy and I do sketch writing. One of the best experiences I had was writing for a show with, at the time, I think it was Ampersand Theater. It's hard to tell because the theater that we have done shows with has changed hands a few times. But I think it was Ampersand and Broad Minded did a 50-50 show. And I got to write some sketches for that.
Oh, wow.
And that was just a great feeling. all my sketches were pretty much film related. And I didn't even notice that at the time. I went back and noticed like all these have some sort of like film reference or something going on. Like I had a Game of Thrones, well, television too, I should say. I had a Game of Thrones sketch. I did sketches about like teen comedies from the 90s. And I learned that I really like marrying my knowledge of film, my love for film, television, all that sort of stuff, even video games, music. I love marrying that with my comedy. When I'm doing improv, I love throwing in a movie reference, you know, and it's like you got to be careful with that. You don't want to just be on stage like my wife, you know, but like there's things you can do, you know, there's, you know, turns and like stuff from movies that like people in the audience are like, oh, I see what he's doing, and it's fun. So anytime I can put together my love of comedy and my love of, you know, media, I love it.
Yeah, and it definitely shines through, I think, especially on this podcast where we could be on a topic that very loosely relates to film or anything else. You know, we've done, Halloween, which obviously lends itself very closely to horror movies, or we've done episodes like, McDonald's, but we still managed to bring up the founder. And it's like there are always little film connections. And obviously, with a film background myself, I always jump at those things. And it's something that I think shines through our comedy and maybe is sort of the underlying theme in a lot of these episodes. But one thing you touched on that I think we have kind of learned over time, too, is that some of the real heroes in this podcast are the guests that we have on, the subject matter experts, so to speak. I think when we originally approached it, I had a vision of a lot of these people being like, oh, the dictionary on this topic. But what it's really kind of become is like, we just like people who are very passionate about the topic, because ultimately you're going to know a lot about it if you love something. The way you love film, Fred, is the same way that a lot of the people who come on love shows like Survivor, or they love a video game like Crash Bandicoot, or they love even just like the food from Taco Bell. Like it's really comes down to that. And I'm very, very happy with how things have developed. And truthfully, I mean, we hope that if you've been along for the journey so far, that you've enjoyed what you're listening to, or that if you're embarking on your journey for the first time, that you'll find the same kind of joy in these things that Fred and I are. So as far as that's concerned, Fred, I think maybe it's important to talk about where you hope the show is going to go, maybe going forward.
Well, I will say that I'm very hopeful for the future of State of the Franchise. I think the state of the podcast is in a great place because I feel we're both comfortable throwing out ideas for shows that really break the mold. We have a lot of exciting stuff coming up. And I love now that we're searching out people to be on the show and asking them, what do you want to talk about? Or even we've had episodes and we've done the opposite where we're like, hey, how do you feel about this topic? And I just kind of like seeing how it's evolving and how we're bringing in more people from the Milwaukee scene because I don't think people realize how great of a comedy scene we have in Milwaukee. We have a lot of great improvisers, stand-ups, writers, and we can showcase that and also just expel this like interest in film in one place. This is so we don't bother the people in our lives with it. This is a good place to let it out. This is like our wailing wall.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess for the future, I just kind of want more of what we're doing in the very present right now. I think we've very much evolved from where it has started. Mm-hmm. I love a lot of those early episodes, but when you listen to the newer episodes, I definitely think we both know what we want out of this podcast, and it makes me excited for more episodes with you, Tom Stadler.
The feeling is mutual, my friend. I have had a hell of a time going through this with you. And when I say hell of a time, I don't mean that in like how terrible. I mean, man, this has been an absolute ride so far. I don't even know if I would have envisioned we'd made it 1 year. Mm-hmm. But yet, here we are. And I think this was the best time for us to really deliver an episode like this to all of you. Because what you may find early on, aside from a couple sound issues, so we would probably recommend, if you are going to embark for the first time, maybe just take episodes 1 and 2 very quickly, keep an eye on your fast forward because the sound is just a tad rougher than we would have liked. We really figured things out in episode 3. So from that point onward, I think we really saw things, though, develop because sound got better. Our format, we talk a lot about the history of the topic, why we love the topic, what's great about all the moments in that franchise's history. And our unique segments have really been this coulda, woulda, shoulda. Like, what could they have done differently, or should they have done differently at one point? Could they do differently in the future? And we wrap it up with like power rankings, and that's always a fun little piece for us to kind of highlight what are the best things if you really had to boil it down to like a top 3 for each of these franchises. Where we've started to develop is that we've done a lot more niche episodes. And I think that's something that excites me moving forward too, Fred, is that we've started to evolve our format so that it doesn't have to be just hardened into those 5 segments that we have right now. It can be something that's kind of close to that, you know, in terms of a holiday episode. How can we maybe change coulda, woulda, shoulda to, ooh, did this really happen in terms of like Halloween?
Or like a good example of how we kind of did early on. We didn't come out and do a Star Wars episode because a lot of people have talked about Star Wars. We did a Star Wars video game episode because I haven't heard many podcasts talk about Star Wars video games. Right. I don't see us as, you know, one day we might do like the Avengers movies, like, but more than likely we're going to pick some avenue adjacent to it where we can still talk about it, but we're going to be uncovering new ground.
Yeah. And I think it should be a great time when we do actually get into those things. And we're going to continue to explore things that are going to lend itself to something bigger than the same things you've heard on every other podcast. You know, theme months are fun. We can always explore something like that. We've kind of dabbled with those slightly, but I could definitely see us diving more into where we are going to find, like, even just like actors in a franchise too, or like, here's just a whole devoted episode to the McRib, which I just had recently, and it is wonderful.
You liked it?
Listen, it's not the greatest thing in the menu, but for what it was supposed to be, I was like, all right, I'm satisfied.
I'll say this about the McRib. My thing is, ever since someone like earwormed me, oh, it's so sweet, it's sweet, I hear that in my head, and it kind of like they're like, oh, the barbecue sauce is so sweet. I think about it every time, and it makes me like, it kind of grosses me out.
Ooh.
I don't know why.
Well, I could kind of see it though. It's almost like if somebody tells you that, you know, something smells like bitter, you know, or something smells musty, then all of a sudden you smell nothing but that must, right, in an environment.
Mm-hmm.
So it totally makes sense. But I'd also love to see, though, Fred, if I could even just continue to tickle this this thread a little more.
Tickle the thread.
I want to tickle that thread. We've talked to a couple people from across the country so far, which has been exciting, even when across the country might just be one state over. But I think we'd love to continue to expand the boundaries and see who we can get on, knowing that we do have some more remote capabilities now, right?
Yeah, we're talking to you, Brussels.
Such honored guests are our Brussels listeners because they love that Jean-Claude Van Damme episode.
We're going to get a letter in the mail like a year later, and it's going to be like the King of Brussels, and it's going to be like, we love State of the Franchise so much. We would be honored if you come to Brussels and get honored with the key to the city, because this podcast is the best thing we've ever heard.
It is now the official podcast of our country. Jean-Claude Van Damme himself will give you the key.
Oh, man. He just throws it in there and kicks it to us. There's your key.
I probably would land in my chest, and then that would be the end of me.
Then he'd have to split.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Which kind of split? So, as far as where we are going from here, Fred, and what we've done so far, I think the last thing that I really want to touch on before we wrap up this episode and let people go and explore is, you know, what are, I guess, your favorite things that you want people to share in when they listen to this podcast?
We definitely would just love to hear what people's favorite episodes are, and if there's any sort of, like, for instance, we did the Tim Burton Batman movies plus the Schumacher ones kind of as one episode. Do people want us to do the Nolan ones? Like, we also are interested if there's people in the area that you think should be on our podcast. We'd love to hear that. Also, yeah, we're just kind of open. Like, we have our email. I know Tom was going to drop it in at the end of this episode for us, plug us away. But really just know that we're very hands-on. We want to hear from the people. And we want to make episodes that people like.
Yeah. And thank you for the segue, because I think I'm going to do that now. And I'm going to add this in greater length, too, of what we're after with this. We do have an email. It's stateofthefranchisepodcast@gmail.com. State of the Franchise Podcast is all one word. Please email us with any questions you have about the podcast, any ideas you may have, anything that you might want to hear, things that you might want to experience. We're also open to maybe talking about new ideas like a Patreon at some point, or potentially doing video versions. That's something that Fred and I have talked on. If those are things you guys are interested in, let us know. We also have a donation page. I mention it at the end of every episode. You'll hear about it. We're not here to solicit money from you. Your ears are all the things that make us happy about this podcast, but we are hoping to do some bigger things like the things we just mentioned. And if we are going to pursue those avenues, all we were looking for is maybe, hey, if you're enjoying what you're listening to, chip in a couple bucks. It can be a one-time drop-in. We do have a repeat donation function if you wanted to do that. It's buymeacoffee.com/SOTF. Same as State of the Franchise. You don't have to feel obligated to do this. Please tell somebody about it. That's actually the best donation you could get is, hey, I listen to these guys. They're great.
Yeah, and even if, you don't want to do that, something that's very helpful. You're at Thanksgiving around the table with your whole family. They're all chilling. Maybe just grab their phones and subscribe to our podcast on all their phones. Your grandma's never going to know. She's got room on her phone for us. Maybe click a few episodes, let them play. Hey, she might like it. It might help her sleep at night. So I'm just saying it'd be nice to get a few more subscriptions. So if you're around that table, just, make a game of it. Hey, everyone subscribe, and then we get some pumpkin pie.
I like this idea that, the grandma's just going to be listening one day and being like, what the heck are they talking about? Who is this Joe Saccone guy? I think I was trying to think of Michael Giacchino, but I was like, wait, Joe Saccone?
Tom sounds handsome.
That boy sounds real lovely. You could also find us on social media. We are on Instagram, State of the Franchise, all one word. We've made that nice and easy for you. If you need to find us with extended, it's State of the Franchise with Tom and Fred. Our Linktree, linktree.com/State of the Franchise. Again, that's all one word. We are on Twitter at the SOTF Pod. We are also on Facebook. You'll find us, State of the Franchise Podcast with Tom and Fred. Fred, any final thoughts you would like to share?
I just want to say thanks, everyone, for listening, and I'm excited for you to check out this podcast.
Me as well. And if you guys do like what you're listening to, the last thing we'll ask you to do is, depending on what podcast platform you are using, please subscribe, and leave us a review if you are so kind. Tell us all about how you feel about State of the Franchise. Just please make sure you listen to more than one episode before you write that review, because we think you'll like something maybe more than something else. That's our inkling. Maybe I'm wrong.
I didn't know if you were against this, because I think any podcast that you like, it's better to listen to the beginning, even if every episode's different, because I feel, we've got some bits, we got some things that, will work better over time. But if you're skeptical, if you're on the fence, look at our episodes and pick something you like. We have something for everybody, which I think you can agree. We cover the gamut of all sorts of things.
It's true. And we do have plenty of ideas coming. Again, State of the Franchise Podcast at gmail.com. If something that we don't have on the ledger and you want to listen to, let us know. But other than that, please enjoy your journey if this is your first episode. And if you have already been listening, thank you so much for listening to us for this whole time. And we look forward to sharing more love and content with you in the future. From all of us here at State of the Franchise,
Good night and good luck.
I'm Tom Stadler.
I'm Fred Dakin.
We'll see you next time.